heartbeat if he had the right policies. But I think Stuart was making a point that is valid, and that is it ties into Sex, Mom, and God in the sense that what we set the stage for when you make moral litmus tests based on your religion, whether you will vote for somebody or not for a secular office, essentially what you're introducing is a soft theocracy. And you're saying, we really don't want the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the rule of law. We want what the religious right wants. And they say, we want America to conform to what the Bible teaches. Well, guess what? That's exactly what the Saudi Arabians say about the Quran, and that's what Wahhabist Saudi Arabian radical Islam is, and that's why there are tens of millions of little boys sitting in madrasas all over the world learning nothing except the Quran, repeating it blindly, not doing science and math. And here in America, we have a counterpoint to that, and it's in your religious right homeschooling homes. And I'm not talking about homeschooling, so hold the letters. I like homeschooling. I write in my book that homeschooling's fine. But when it's for the purpose of indoctrination, as in I don't want my kid exposed to any ideas except what goes on in this household, you got a problem, especially if that indoctrination includes no global warming is real, science is false, evolution is not true, and by the way, all those big bad universities don't go. Just wait for God to lead you to the man of his choice and be a subservient woman like I am, speaking from the point of view of a homeschooling mother, and all these things. And I talk in Sex, Mom, and God about how, unfortunately, one of the things I did was discover Mary Pride, who made a $1 million industry out of writing homeschooling manuals for people who wanted to keep their kids at home and educate them and keep them out of the mainstream. And so we're not too different. And I'd just like to add a caveat to this. No, it's not. It's a footnote to this, and that is I often get asked in media about these issues, and I say, look, put on a wider lens for a minute, pull back. What's really going on here? It's not about American politics and the rise of the religious right, although it is about that. But what my book, Sex, Mom, and God, talks about is a small part of a worldwide phenomenon, and that is the collision between fundamentalist religion of all kinds and modernity and science. I'm not saying a collision between religion and science. I said fundamentalist religion and science. Who do you think Al-Qaeda is? What do you think the Taliban was trying to do? What's wrong with Pakistan? Why are there Hindu nationalists murdering Christian missionaries again? As hasn't happened for a long time. Because on the rise across the globe, from Riyadh to Bombay to Portland, Oregon, here, other places, the religion is less interesting and important to this issue than the idea of fundamentalism, clinging to fundamentals of a religious orientation of the past, refusing to change, refusing to grow, refusing to learn, shut the doors, circle the wagons, Katie bar the door. That's what's going on. And the American phenomena of the rise of the religious right is part of this reaction. So it can be triggered by Roe v. Wade, or gay rights, or science, or evolution, textbook committees who want to rewrite American history to give it a Christian background when it had far from a Christian background. It was much more nuanced than that. Touch it where you like. What we're seeing here is no different than what's happening in other parts of the world, sometimes more radically. And so the real shame is that I would like to say, from the point of view of someone who is religious and who will be in church next Sunday, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is that what has really paid the price here is not just American politics and a second dip recession, which may be on the way because of the 87 freshman Tea Party congressmen who have literally stalled the U.S. government and will not do what the U.S. government does, which is govern, because they're trying to dismantle it from within. The real story here is another tragedy, and that is religion has taken a black eye from which it may not recover, because enough people strap on suicide belts and kill women and children, enough idiots take their kids out of school and actually try to defund public schools because they say they're evil because they're not Christ-centered, enough people run around saying we have to bring our country back to the Bible, and if you're not voting for our candidates, you're not a real American, you're not patriotic. And pretty soon, it'll be like the time after World War I, when people who had marched into battle and seen millions of people killed in the name of God going before us and so forth, just say, hey, to heck with this, this is religion's problem. And of course, you see that in the new atheism that I talk about in Patience with God, faith for people who don't like religion or atheism. And in that book, I have an equally tough-minded critique of fundamentalist Christianity and the Left Behind novels and all this crazy eschatology of waiting for the end and even trying to egg it on a little bit, kick those people out of the West Bank, let's get rid of them sooner so Jesus can just come on back because they're supposed to be all the way into Samaria, aren't they, according to that Bronze Age map I got here somewhere, carved on stone. But other than that, we've got a situation where religion itself is taking an enormous black eye. And I resent that as a religious believer, because what we are being accused of as religious people is really of tending towards being people who want a theocracy. Because if you look at this Bring America Back to God, if you look at what the Republican Party is doing these days, in the way it's become the shill of the Republican far right, and like I said earlier, that would shock my Republican friends like Bill Buckley and Jack Kemp, who were reasonable people, agree or disagree, but they didn't hate the United States of America. They weren't trying to defund the government and wreck it from within. They were patriotic Americans, and they could have a rational discussion. So yeah, the whole exclusion of people who don't fit the evangelical, stereotypical Christian right-wing candidate is going to continue to increase. And so it isn't just you got to go to church now to be elected, you have to be the right kind of Christian. And of course, it's a story I tell in Sex, Mom, and God, because that narrowness is the fundamentalist vision that I came out of. Fortunately, as I said, my mother was a blessed hypocrite and didn't live that way, but that's what I was taught was right. It was just us and 3 other people, and I wasn't sure about them, who were correct. And that's that kind of narrowing vision that you see all over the world. Yes, do you want to just step to the mic, or shout it out and I'll repeat it?
Do you propose any sort of solution to the problem? How do you accept the trend?
Do I propose a solution? Do I propose a solution to the problem? Yes, I do. Part of the solution is information. And one of the things that we have to do is tell the story I tell in Sex, Mom, and God, which is a cheap way to say buy my book. And that's the solution. I wish it was that simple. But there is something in the information that I have in Sex, Mom, and God that is part of the solution. And that is to honestly say what has happened and to stop being so respectful of religion in this separation of church and state. What's happening is that decent, progressive-minded people hesitate to be critical of people for wild-eyed, crazy religious views because they say, well, that's their personal belief. I can't say anything about this. So they believe the earth is 6,000 years old and Jesus will come back soon and take everybody away, and we have to defund the U.S. government because it's an instrument of Satan. But other than that, they're fairly reasonable people. Oh, yes, and they believe Barack Obama's the Antichrist, as, by the way, 30% of the voters in New Jersey who voted Republican said they did, and that's New Jersey. That's supposed to be New Jersey. New Jersey's not supposed to be given to that kind of thinking. This isn't Iowa. No offense to anybody in Iowa or Kansas or any of the places there. This is New Jersey. So one of the things we have to do, I think, and that I hope comes out of Sex, Mom, and God, and Crazy for God, and Patience with God taken together, and Sex, Mom, and God in particular, and I hesitate to say this, but is a lack of respect for any view that comes packaged as a religious personal belief. We have a right to say, but where will this take us? If you think the U.S. is an instrument of, if the U.S. government is an instrument of communism and socialism and Satan and all the rest of it, just because we want to have health care for 33 million uninsured people, and you're basing this on the Bible, we're not going to stand back and say, well, that's your personal belief, and because it's religious, we're not going to be able to say anything about it. Maybe the people who go around saying things like that and organizations that make those views known shouldn't have tax-deductible status anymore. That might be an idea. Maybe we should stand up and reverse it. The old thing about if you're an atheist, you can't be elected president. I think a sort of, I know this is very crazy and sounding and people won't like it, but, a timeout from all religious influence in government and politics worldwide right now wouldn't be so bad. Little boys in Pakistan might be able to learn math and geology instead of the Quran. Little boys in Dubuque, Iowa, little girls too, might be able to learn about evolution. And the fact that, a few minutes ago we were all single-celled organisms and we're not that smart now, and we ought to have a little humility, and that, sitting around trying to figure out when Jesus is coming back is less productive for a 12-year-old than, learning some algebra, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And worldwide, it would be a really nice thing if religion of a politicized sort would just go away for a while and leave the rest of us alone. and stop blowing our mosques up. And as I say in the book, nobody ever blew up a mosque or an abortion clinic or any other facility in the name of religion or God after they yelled, "But I could be wrong." So they yell other things, but they don't say, "But I could be wrong." But the whole message of Christianity is, "But I could be wrong." And you know what? Am wrong. So that the humility of religion itself has been turned on its head into a kind of an aggressive, politicized form of politicking, which really, I feel, has no place in politics or religion. And so the most ironic thing for me, getting all the email I do and the hate blogs on all these political sites about my writing and my books, is that from my point of view, and I know it's a limited perspective and I'll change my mind and I could be wrong, but I actually am mounting a pretty good defense of religion and Christianity in particular by saying it doesn't all have to be this way, and I'm very sorry for the mistakes we made along the way. I'll take another question. Yes, back there.
Hi. What advice would you give an Orthodox Christian who's going off to college at a point in their life when they're critical point in their life when they're developing their own spiritual identity
Sure.
and implementing their own values as they encounter the very loud and often extreme evangelical right?
Let me repeat that because so people can hear. The question is, what advice would I give to an Orthodox Christian or any person who's going off to a college these days and is going to encounter the strident voice of the religious right packaged as Christianity, the groups that will try to bring them in and make them part of the program? You know, I would just be very honest and just say, just because something packaged Christianity comes your way doesn't mean that this is Christianity. And I would teach them a healthy skepticism from day one. For instance, one of the things I talk about in my book that I hope this young person that you're talking about will read is that one of the reasons I got out of the religious right, or they can just wait for the paperback, one of the reasons I got out of the religious right, and this strikes people as interesting, I think, was because of the fundamental and deep and growing anti-Americanism of the right. People figure the right comes wrapped in a flag and Jesus and family values. The folks that are out there now are anti-American. They actually despise this country as it is. You see it in the anti-immigration policy. They despise open borders. They despise our tradition of welcoming the stranger. Weird for people who, you know, supposedly have access to the Bible. They despise a country that gives gay people rights. They despise a country, a lot of them do, unfortunately, that would elect a black man for president. They feel betrayed by this. Half the sound and fury about the deficit and all the rest of it has nothing to do with the deficit. Listen, we just fought 2 undeclared wars costing $1 trillion apiece, declared by a good Bible-believing white boy from Texas, and there was no talk about deficit spending. It just coincidentally suddenly became this huge issue when we looked up and we saw one of them in the White House. Now we got to do something about it. And so let's be honest with people and just talk about the fact that, you know, not everything that comes packaged as Christian or patriotic or wrapped in flags is Christian or patriotic or wrapped in a flag. And most of the time now, the right, from my point of view, as I talk about in Sex, Mom, and God, and Crazy for God as well, is profoundly unpatriotic. And as the father of a Marine, who, by the way, fought in Afghanistan twice and once in Iraq, and who went into the Marine Corps out of high school, and I write about in a book that, because Oprah had me on her show, became a bestseller called Keeping Faith, a father-son story about love in the United States Marine Corps, I have an appreciation for our military. And I have appreciation for our flag. And nothing gets your attention like having your children shot at. And so I don't speak as some, you know, trendy, whatever, outsider who knows nothing about these things. Been there, done that, gone down to Parris Island, researched my novel, Baby Jack, lived on the base for a while there doing the research, gotten those letters and those midnight phone calls from a son in combat. I resent people who think it's their mission in life because the U.S. government isn't Christian enough to defund it and strip America of the humane programs that supposedly my son was defending because our culture was trying to show a better way to the world, a welcome to the stranger. Courts of law, not Sharia courts in the name of Christianity, which is what this back to the Bible stuff is all about. And so that thread has to run through here. And I'd say what you tell that young person is you're going to encounter groups who call themselves Christians and patriotic, find out what their real agenda is, and you're going to dig a little bit and find under the evangelical surface is a hatred and distrust of our own government, which borders on a lack of patriotism, which to a former generation of actual conservatives, because these people are not conservatives, they're radical revolutionaries, would have appeared almost treasonous. A guy like Bill Buckley would have had short shrift for the Michel Bachmanns and the Rick Perrys of this world. He would have dismissed them in a heartbeat. First of all, because he could speak English and think, and he didn't like people who couldn't. And secondly, because he would have regarded them as vilely unpatriotic, because their criticism of America and that people aren't real Americans and only people like us are correct has crossed a line long ago, and they need to be called on it. So we'll wrap it up. I thank you very much. My books are over here, and I will sign them for you if you buy them. I'll even sign them for you if you don't. So thank you very much. And the titles, again, are Sex, Mom, and God, Crazy for God, Patience with God. It's the God trilogy, and that's that. Thank you.
You're watching 48 hours of nonfiction authors and books on C-SPAN 2's Book TV.
Winston Churchill graces the cover of World in the Balance, The Perilous Months of June through October 1940. New book by Brooke Stoddard. Mr. Stoddard, what was going on in Great Britain June through October 1940?
The Nazis from Germany had basically overrun nearly all of Europe. They controlled from the Atlantic Circle, northern Norway, through the southern part of Europe. And a lot of people thought that Britain would collapse or cave in a matter of weeks. France had been overrun in about several weeks. And many people thought that Britain would follow. It didn't happen. And this is the story about why that didn't happen. Churchill's leadership was a big part of it. The British people rallied to Winston Churchill. The Germans couldn't come across the Channel on account of the Royal Navy, but they did send thousands of airplanes to bomb Britain, and in hopes of invading Britain eventually. They couldn't overcome the Royal Air Force, and eventually October came along, bad weather began, the Germans couldn't invade Britain, and they had to put off any kind of invasion plan till spring. So this is the story about those months. They were very, very critical months.
So after the bombing ended, did the bombing essentially end in October 1940?
No, it continued. In Britain, they have what they call the Battle of Britain, which lasted up till about October, and then they had the Blitz. The Germans continued to bomb, mainly at night, through the winter. But the Battle of Britain was basically in the daylight, and they couldn't overcome the fighter arm of the Royal Air Force and couldn't invade. That's what the Battle of Britain was about.
Was there a time between June and October 1940 when it looked really bad for Great Britain?
There were a number of times it looked really bad. In June, that was the end of the Dunkirk battle. It looked pretty bad then. And then again in September is a very, very critical month, and the Royal Air Force was not really sure they could maintain air superiority over southern England. Submarine warfare was very critical at this point. It was a very, very close call. It was a close thing.
Brooke Stoddard is a former editor of the Military Heritage magazine. Is this your first book?
It is my first book, yes, Peter.
How much time did you spend on it?
I actually started it in the 1990s and worked on it in fits and starts till very recently.
Potomac Books is the publisher of World in the Balance, The Perilous Months of June through October 1940.
And now Catherine Cryer argues that partisan politics are hurting the United States. She discusses a range of issues, including the economy, health care, and political debate. Catherine Cryer speaks for about 50 minutes.
We are privileged tonight to have with us an extraordinary woman and author of her New Patriots Act, What Americans Must Do